Morning and welcome to our webinar today. If you wouldn't mind just dropping me a comment to let me know that you can see and hear us okay, that would be great, and we will be getting started shortly. If you do have a question for Dr. Kay, David or myself, please do drop us a comment. You should find a Q&A box running along the bottom of your screen, and we'll be coming to those at the end. So what was the webinar on?
It was on ethical leadership, actually,
Oh, okay.
in post-COVID times. In actual fact, it's the presenter. We had this conversation that when we're planning events, we're talking about post-COVID, with the hope that when we're designing something, we would be in different times, and of course we're not. We're still in the sort of same situation. So. But still equally relevant.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alice. Thanks for confirming. That's great. We'll just wait a couple of more moments to make sure everyone is logged in, and we'll be starting very shortly. If you have just joined, if you do have a question, please do ask via the Q&A box running along the bottom of your screen. Just to let you know ahead of next week's webinar, next week we are focusing on planning and strategy for high volume recruitment campaigns. So do feel free to register for that. The link is available on our website, and it's sure to be a good one if you are looking at high volume recruiting yourself. Okay, so it's 10:30, let's get started. And thank you for joining us on our virtual interviewing for employees webinar. As always, the aim with our webinars is to provide you with high quality content to take away. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Hayley and I'm the Director of Sales at Neves & Neat. Today, I am delighted to be joined by two very excellent panellists. We have David Copple, founder and CEO at Shine Interview, and we have Dr. Kay Maddox-Daines, Director of Academic Learning at Acacia Learning. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
How are you doing?
Really well, thanks.
Excellent. So the webinar today is due to run for around an hour. And if you have just joined, I'm going to say again about this Q&A box. If you have any questions, you should find a Q&A box running along the bottom of your screen. Don't hesitate to ask if you do have a question, and we will come round to those as soon as we can. So obviously virtual interviewing has been something that has taken a huge leap in terms of popularity over the last few months, mainly due to the COVID situation. So today we're going to be looking at how to use virtual interviewing effectively, top tips for hiring managers that are interviewing, and really top tips, I guess, in terms of the setup as well. So our esteemed panellists will be offering their insight, knowledge and expertise. So if I could start with you, Dr. Kay, could I head over to you for a short intro, please?
Okay, so my name's Kay Maddox-Daines. I've been working in education and straddling practice for probably the last 10 years. Prior to that, I worked in the private sector. So my background is organisational development and human resource management, and more recently in delivering programs specifically for the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development. So one of my specialities is looking at interviewing skills, which have been in the more traditional arena until probably the last 3 to 5 years. So I enjoy being able to undertake research in people management and strategic management, and actually making that real so that it's relevant to practitioners.
Fantastic. And David, over to you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So my background isn't actually in recruitment. It's originally trained as a software engineer and spent many years in that discipline. And in 2008, went into a small startup. It was an e-learning company as one of the founding team there and CTO. And over a number of years, we grew to, well, we grew quite rapidly. We were working on some quite interesting projects at the time, and come the end of it, I had around 50 people in my team, so developers, project managers, and the like. We weren't, SME sort of stage. We weren't big enough to have an internal HR function, but at the time, as CTO, I was responsible for a good piece of that recruitment process. And at the time, that was a very frustrating piece of my role, really. So how do you validate the skills on a CV? How do you go through that interview process? So I think this is quite common for hiring managers. You kind of put in that situation of conducting an interview, for example, and you've never had any training around that or how to do it properly. So that was always a bit of a frustration, and how do you manage the process, et cetera, et cetera. So when I left that company and looked to start up my own software company in 2015 going into 2016, it was really looking at how could we improve parts of the process. And video interviewing at the time was emerging, but I wouldn't say was mainstream. And talking to a number of people across different sectors going into 2016, it was very much a case of, well, we've got an opportunity to create a second generation, if you like, of these sort of tools, looking at how can we solve some of the problems that I had experienced from a personal level over 5 or 6 years prior to that. And then that has evolved into the Shine platform. So we're based in the Northeast, but have clients all over the world working with different sectors and different types of use cases, from high volume recruitment right down to executive level recruitment and everything in between.
Fantastic. Both very, very fascinating in terms of what you do, and really excited to talk to you both today. So to begin today's session, we are going to do look at video in the recruitment process. And I wondered if I could come over to you, David, to start off with that. How have you seen video develop since you started the business and to where we are now?
I think in terms of the acceptance and in terms of the technology, they've been the biggest leaps forward. We had competitors who launched in 2008, so going back a little while. And at the time, they were actually sending webcams out to candidates in the post. So it was a very disjointed process, believe it or not. And even just people's laptops, people's phones, are now at the point where the technology isn't a barrier to doing that. And we're not just talking about, you might think younger people are quite happy to be on the video, for example, but actually, and I think the last 3 or 4 months have highlighted this, everything is moving that way. Video consumption is really ubiquitous across the board. We're all used to jumping on a Zoom call. It's second nature. So why can't we look to streamline processes with technology? But I think the biggest shift, I think, has been the fact that the technology is now able to kind of meet those needs and facilitate that process without being a barrier. And I think that's really interesting as we progress. Definitely.
So for your clients, what in terms of offerings do you say to them in terms of how it can help with the recruitment process? Because I know when we was talking last week on our prep call, there's numerous things that people can be doing to utilise software like yourselves in terms of assessments, first and second stage interviews, pre-screening, compliance. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I guess if we take a step back as well and think, how can video be used at different stages of the recruitment process? And if you look at it from an employer branding point of view, how we get the message across, I think that's really important. So being able to reach out to people at that very early stage, and that's not necessarily about recruitment and selection. That's almost a marketing function at that stage, or job advertisements. How do we bring video into that part of the process? So these are areas early on in the life cycle where we're trying to help that. For example, being able to send LinkedIn introductions, video introductions to candidates, for example, or being able to interact that way at a very early stage.
Yeah.
And then taking it on through the process and thinking about what you want to get out of it, I think determines what tools from, say, our platform that you'd be looking to use. And there's a couple of different maybe concepts that I think are probably worth explaining to people. And particularly if you're used to using something like Zoom or Skype, or we've seen recently people have picked up these sort of tools because it's been forced on them, but now they're taking a step back and thinking, well, we do have a recruitment need moving forward. Maybe we should look at specialized tools and see what else we can bring into that mix. There's two main types of video interviewing. There's the one-way or individual, if you like, and what that means is, as a hiring manager, you'd be setting a series of questions online through, say, an admin tool, but they're predetermined questions that would be sent out to all candidates. So all the candidates would receive exactly the same experience, and they would conduct that interview. They're almost speaking to the camera on, say, their phone or the laptop, but they're doing that in their own time. They're not taking time out of their current workday or their current situation. It's very, very flexible, and that works really well where, say, you've got volume requirements, or you at a pre-screening stage, you need to cut down that shortlist if it's a large graduate campaign or retail, for example, or potentially where you've got a large geography involved and it's just very difficult to coordinate time zones at that stage of the process. So that's one aspect of it, and there's things you can do there to make that much more interactive, which I think we'll maybe come on to as well as
yes,
the discussion progresses. But the other side is where it's more of a live environment, very much like what we're doing here. So replicating the face-to-face interview, there's a two-way discussion. The hiring manager, they're able to maybe probe a little bit deeper, and again, it might be where you're actually trying to elicit a response or get the culture across a little bit more, and that lends itself quite well if you're looking at, say, assessment centres or panel interviews as well. So you're not just restricted to 2 or 3 people in a room. It could be done in a way that you can share your screen, for example, and start to maybe run through presentations, for example. So it then maybe starts to replicate that assessment centre type feel. So they're the two real, I guess, types of online interviewing that we've got, and there's that one way, and then there's that live type environment, and what that then entails.
Out of interest, because I'm sure this is quite a common question, how many takes do people get when to give the perfect answer? On the
one way, it's set up so it's really configurable, and you can do it so it's a one take and the pressure's on. So if it's more of a high stakes and you're trying to replicate that and putting them in that high pressure environment, then you go through a practice question as many times as you like, get everything set up so you're comfortable, but it would take the first take. But you can also set it whereby you've got reading time, and then you've got a certain amount of time to answer the question, or it could be a little bit more open-ended, and you can set the number of retries. Typically, at the stage that you're looking to do there, it's more about getting to know people. And if you think, if you're going through a number of these and you're using it as a pre-selection tool to get to your shortlist, you don't generally mind if they've retried it a couple of times and refined the answer, because it may be nerves or it may be anything else. So it's about getting to know them, I think, at that stage, and then you can then move on to the next stage, which is probing a little bit deeper.
Absolutely. Dr. Kay, if I can come over to you for your thoughts in terms of these two different styles of interviewing and how they go down in terms of, I guess, from a candidate perspective, but also from a hiring manager perspective. How do you feel about what David was talking about there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, actually, on the practice, I think one of the misconceptions about when we're starting to use video is that it has to be perfect, and there's the feeling, well, I must edit that so that I'm this perfect person with a perfect answer. And you know, that's absolutely not what recruiters are looking for, because they're looking for personality, and you know, it's much more interesting to listen to somebody who sounds natural rather than somebody who sounds very rehearsed. So I think one of the things that I would just emphasize is the need to be natural, and not to worry about the ums and the ahs and perhaps the stumblings when you're thinking through something. From a hiring manager's perspective, I actually think that adds something, so that you can get to know the real person, and not, you know, you don't want to see somebody who's coming onto a stage. You want to know what that person's going to be like if they're sitting next to you in an office, or perhaps if you know, going forward, if you're working online with them, what are they going to be like day in, day out?
100% Kay. So it's absolutely, it's about personality, it's about getting to know someone, and the last thing you want is somebody reading from a script. That's, yeah, you need to meet the person and to see what they would be like to work with. So 100% agree with you on that point.
Yeah, and I also think, you know, when people are in their home settings, there's often things that, you know, that they feel more relaxed, and you know, things, for example, like, hey, you've got your books, and I, you know, might be able to ask you a bit more, you know, what's your favourite book, and it gives you kind of more of a lead into finding a bit more about the personality, the interests, the hobbies, and I think that's a really important part of you know, the hiring process.
Absolutely, yes, and I think just so that people can have the opportunity of feeling comfortable, but I have to say not too comfortable. Okay, so because you know, one of my colleagues, she said she was on an interview. She didn't realise, you know, at the start of this process, she hadn't been experienced in terms of using video. She didn't realise people were going to be able to see her, and she was sat there in her dressing gown. So I think, you know, there's a comfortable and there's comfortable, isn't there? So, you know, just making sure that you do feel relaxed, but that you are still going to be interviewing or an interviewee, and you know, just to keep their sort of good practice parameters in place, which I think we're going to come on to in a little while.
Yes. So I think this actually might be a good point to lead on to that, Kay, because we're going to be talking now about kind of setting the scene. This is obviously from more of an employer perspective, so people that are doing the interviews. And Kay's going to be talking to us about her top tips for setting the scene for these interviews. And I think, you know, what that will encapsulate is actually there's a lot of pre-information that the candidates need. But there's also a lot of information that the interviewer will need to look at before turning on their video interviewing platform, whatever they're deciding to use. So Kay, over to you. What are you thinking? So setting the scene for our candidates, but also from an employer perspective.
Well, the first thing I always say, if you just turn up expecting to interview, it's likely that interview is going to be pretty unsuccessful. The thing about interviewing, it is about having a conversation, but there's a lot of preparation that needs to go into making that an effective conversation. So one of the things that I always say at the beginning of every course I run on interviewing skills, preparation, preparation, preparation. It's all in the preparation. So what does that look like? Well, before you even get to the video interview, for example, how have you arrived at that position? So have you written a job description, a person specification? Are you using a competency-based framework? How are you going to know what you're going to be asking? So hopefully you've gone through this process, and of course it depends on if you're interviewing on a one-to-one, if you're interviewing with a panel. In terms of the preparation, you'll need to know what questions you're going to ask, and I know we're going to come on to that in a little while. You'll need to know who else you're going to be interviewing with, and how is it going to work between you. And I always like to use sort of the news program formula, so that you're talking about what are you going to be talking about, you're talking about it, and then you're summarizing, but also you're presenting your colleagues at the beginning of the meeting, and you're then passing over to your colleagues who's going to talk about the next part of the interview, so that you've got a lot of signposting going on. But before we get into more detail about actually running the interview, let's think more about the actual interview itself. So let's assume that we've done the preparation, we know who we're interviewing with, we know what questions we're going to ask. What program are we going to be using? So I know in these times of the pandemic, a lot of interviews have been moved online at the last minute, and people have been told they're using Zoom or Teams or whatever, Skype, and then they sort of have a fumble 2 minutes before the interview and it doesn't work, and there's sort of panic stations. So the key is to make sure whatever platform you're using, that you're a little bit familiar with it, and then you know what the expectation is. But not only that, you know what you're using, where are you going to position yourself? So for example, and in fact, David will probably be able to say more about this in just a moment, but lighting, and what have you got in your background? Do you mind people seeing what you've got in your background? What are you wearing? Who else is going to be around? What about the noise, the disruption? I mean, particularly when you're interviewing at home, have you got a space? Do you need to put sort of a interview in progress on your living room door or something, so people know, because when we're working at home, there's all sorts of disruptions that possibly can occur. And I think it's reasonable to assume that candidates are not going to be too bothered about this, but it's just making sure that we're putting the requirements in place to have an effective discussion, so that we can, at the end of the interview, make a decision as to whether or not this candidate is the most appropriate person to do the job that we've got.
Yep. Absolutely. David, any comments there on the lighting?
On the lighting, you need a big neon sign behind you. That looks fantastic. I think, yeah, I agree. It's a conversation, and the best interviews are, where the candidate gets something from it as well. So, whether it's a candidate or hiring manager, we're not assessing people on their appearance as such. But that said, there's still some sort of a professional image that you need to put across. So if you're clearly in a bedroom and there's clothes strewn all over the bed, it doesn't give the best impression. So it's just little things that you can do. It's not about getting necessarily suited and booted, but just treating it with the same respect that you would a face-to-face interview. And yeah, absolutely, in terms of the technology, don't leave it to the last minute. The number of times we see candidates trying to go through the process 2 minutes before the deadline, and then they've got an internet problem, for example. Just make sure that you give yourself plenty of time. It's in an environment that someone's not going to walk in on you. So a little hanger on the door, I think, is a great idea. We've seen candidates where, probably graduates, where their mum has walked in and started coaching them halfway through, and so you forgot to say this, and hang on, it's being recorded. So you're thinking about things like that in terms of the kit and so on. You don't necessarily need lighting, but just make sure you're not sat in front of a window where the light is shining through. Make sure you can close blinds as you would if you're taking a photograph, so you can actually see your image on the screen, and usually you'll have the facility to actually test that as well and play it back, see what it looks like, see what you sound like, make sure the microphone's working and the microphone itself is turned on. So again, we've seen situations where it's been on the phone and they've not set the permissions or granted the permissions for the app to use the microphone, and you can see the lips moving but nothing's coming out. So just making sure, if you're taking through that process to practice and test everything, make sure you've done that and you're comfortable with it, I think, and that would be the first thing. And just from then on in, it's just a case of relax, smile, and try and enjoy it, because it's not about being in a high pressured environment. It's a conversation, and when it becomes a bit more natural, that's where it works best.
And also, I think the preparation in the lead up, so that if you've got a designated template that you're sending out in the interview invitations to your people that you've selected, make sure that almost has a what to expect. And also if you're using functionality like Teams, Zoom or Shine, that you've got, you know, a step-by-step guide on how to access it. It may be that not everybody needs it, and obviously they are becoming very popular at the moment and people are becoming more comfortable with them, but just so you know, you've got that absolute clear plan in terms of what they're going to be expecting and what you're expecting from them. I think that key information can make them feel more prepared, but also from your point of view, you know, you've covered it off.
Yeah, and thinking about how it fits into the bigger picture and just communicating, what are the different communication points, making sure that you tell the candidates why we're going through this process and what the benefits are to you, to them, and when things are going to happen. So as you normally would, it's about what the timescales are, when you're going to follow up, what to expect next. And as long as you're setting the expectations along the way, then it can be really effective. And absolutely, it's, you know, including information up front around what the steps are, what the company is, what the role is that they're going into. So you could, for example, include a short video on the company, or
Yes.
you know, a short get to know you video, a day in the life type video with someone who's currently in that role. And that's a really good way just to get the culture across as well, and just bring it to life a little bit more. So there's little things like that you can do throughout the process as well.
I think that's really important in particular the current time when there isn't the opportunity to show people around the office or perhaps your physical building, to be able to incorporate the video of what it might look if somebody is going to be working in an office going forward. But I think setting the expectations really, really key. One of the pieces of feedback that I've had quite a lot is that people think about the virtual interview as a more informal experience, and both recruiters, hiring managers and candidates are still sometimes expecting the proper interview to come after this initial interview. So it's just reiterating, is this the first step of a few steps, or is there a decision that's going to be made? And of course, more and more companies are feeling much more comfortable in making a decision based on a virtual interview. But I have to say, you know, in the past, that hasn't always been the case. So it is just probably a good idea to include that in those initial expectations and clarifications.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that links into the question we've just had there as well.
Yes.
So if I maybe read that out, shall I?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So from Anonymous, I think with the current pandemic, people are more understanding that you may not be in an ideal environment for video interviews, or general work and appearance. Background distractions, etc., aren't frowned upon as much as they would be in normal times. I sense this understanding will continue, which I welcome. What are both your thoughts on this? Yeah, I think from my point of view, there's almost been a seismic shift in thinking. It'll be interesting how that continues over the coming months. But personally, I think this hybrid way of working will be here to stay, and I think that will be reflected in what the recruitment process looks like as well. I think for us as a company, speaking for us, we've got a really nice office and a good base, but I think that's just going to be a hub that we come back to. And what we found is that, you know, it is just as effective working from home. But there's maybe been a bounce around productivity and things like that, because you've got maybe the novelty of working from home.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to consider around how we interact with people, how we facilitate collaboration, for example. I'm personally quite lucky in that I've got a space at home where I can go and work, but you've got younger members of the team where, you know, they may have a bedroom would be the best place to work, and they don't have the appropriate work desk and monitor set up. So there's things like that we need to consider. And then the more social aspect of it, which, you know, we work really hard on, you know, and video is a part of that, for example, in how we communicate and do that on a daily and weekly basis. but there's a lot more to it than just saying we're all going to work from home. And just one point I would maybe make on that is what we've all been doing recently it's not working from home, it's working at home during a pandemic with kids at home and everything else that goes around it. So as we find our way to this slightly more normal situation, or the new normal, then I think we'll find a way of working that will move forwards. And I think attitudes around that, and that feeds into the question around the recruitment process and that ideal environment. I think we all understand if we're in that environment and you're on a Zoom call and the doorbell rings or there's a dog barking in the background, it's not the end of the world, and that it's people's lives, and it's maybe bringing that work-life balance to the fore. And I think we need to understand that during that recruitment process as well. But that's life, and it's perhaps the lines are a little bit more blurred moving forwards.
I think the clients that I have are focusing very much on the short term rather than the longer term, and so there's a focus on ensuring business sustainability for the immediate future. But nonetheless, even though I think the most traditional forms of organisation are starting to understand and appreciate the benefits of working remotely and in different ways, certainly. And I think what we will need to do is just think about how we're going to be taking care of our people, because people have been amazing, I think, in responding to COVID and embracing what they have in their homes to be able to maintain their productivity. But this isn't sustainable, and we have become, some of us, slaves to technology. And I think for organizations, we'll have to really start thinking about how to manage this, making sure that we're going to be putting our out of office on at a particular time, and making sure when we return that we do get away. And so this is a really different way. And I know that we're going slightly off the point here in terms of recruiting, but it is part of the whole new working experience. And I do believe that we are going to be, but we're not going to park this now. This is becoming a new way of working for us, and virtual interviews will be, I think, a large part of going forward.
I do think it's very relevant though, because if we are working remotely, how does that affect the recruitment process and then subsequently the onboarding process? And be interested in your thoughts on this as to how best we can show off the culture. How can we make people feel integrated into the team, because it's very difficult to do remotely.
Isn't it? And I've certainly noticed that for the people that we're working with that have had interviews virtually and then started their jobs actually physically in the office, or just doing kind of a bit of both, that of course, unless that's been really kind of highlighted effectively at interview, they perhaps don't know what they were walking into in terms of the physical layout of the office and the people that they're going to be working with. It is quite possible that during the whole hiring process, they might have only been interviewed by one or two people in quite a large organisation. So how do we get across the company's values, culture, environment? I think the video is a great idea. I think that is actually a really good idea in terms of like getting a tour of the office potentially, even though there's not going to be necessarily people there, but it kind of gives an idea of what it could look like should people return to the office. Kay, anything to add to that?
In terms of the onboarding, I think what it's so important to be able to get people, as you say, feeling a part of the organisation. And I think some organisations and teams that I've been working with have almost been accused of over communicating in COVID times. So there's been a huge surge in meetings because people feel like they need to keep in touch. And I think it's about recognising how to work with the individuals in the organization, because, you know, some people really would like to have more meetings and check-ins and working with buddies or mentors to maintain that momentum. And actually some people don't. Some people just say, hey, let me just get on with my work, please. I really don't need another meeting in my diary. So it is about recognizing individual need, but also putting in place programs, schemes, support that's going to work virtually. You know, in a team that I work in, we have I'm sure lots of people do, a WhatsApp group, as well as regular Teams meetings, so that you get the whole team together regularly, but not too regularly, you know, because we don't want to feel overburdened. And regular check-ins from the manager, but then you've got to be careful because you don't want to be seen to be micromanaging. So what was the style of the manager prior to this new way of working? And how is it now? And it's just recognizing the subtlety of effective management going forward. And it comes back to that big word, capital T, trust. Yes. How are we supporting and trusting our staff just to get on and do what we know they can do? Because, of course, a big part of all of this is ensuring that people are going to be healthy. Their mental health is absolutely priority, and ensuring that they're going to be with us for the longer term, if that's what they choose to do.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, that's great. Kay, in terms of your top tips, actually, for hiring managers, I'm thinking more now about questions. Have you got any kind of basic pointers in terms of what you can be offering for hiring managers, thinking about the style of questioning, different types of interview styles, and what's going to work best for them in terms of getting the information they need out of the interviewee?
So the questions that we ask at interview should come from the preparation that we've done for the interview. I cannot overstress this. It's so important not to make up the questions when we're in the interview. It all comes through the preparation. So if you've designed a job description and a person specification, you'll see what you're asking for in your job advertisement, and that will align therefore to the interview questions. So what is it that you're asking somebody to do? What is the point of the interview? The point of the interview is finding out whether or not somebody can actually do what they've said they can do through the application process. So it's very important, I think, to focus on the questions that are going to give you the information to make a decision. I'm not a big fan of questions that say, that might ask you about what animal you would like to be. If you're, you know, things like this. I personally have a really hard job assessing how that relates to whether or not this person can do X, Y, and Z in the job. However, it may be that you have an organization that is focusing on competencies. So it might be that you ask questions related to competencies in terms of, I don't know, communication, team working, innovation, so things such as that. You also might ask questions about focusing on the values of the organization. So questions can be designed according to the preference of the organization, and what are you trying to actually find? Do you want somebody, do you want to recruit somebody against a person specification? Do you want to recruit somebody against specific competencies to help them to do the job? Are you looking for people that will fit in to the organization? Perhaps you want to be able to give people the opportunity to progress and grow within the organization. For example, graduate programs might look at a wider spectrum of competencies and values. So it depends on the organization that you're recruiting for. There's an acronym I use to help design questions, and it's called WASP. And it's dividing the interview into 4 different component parts. So you're starting off, the first element is W. It's welcome, welcoming the candidates. Online, virtually, did you manage to log on okay? Do you have a drink, perhaps, to feel comfortable? Do you have any questions before we get started? And then, of course, it's setting the scene. It's giving people the opportunity to know what is it they're going to be undertaking in this interview. How long is the interview going to last? Who's going to ask the questions if it's on a panel? And how do you know when you should ask questions? So all of this is right at the beginning. This is the welcome phase. The second aspect is acquiring information. So this is the recruiters asking the questions. What questions have you prepared? How are you going to ask the questions with the panel? Who's going to ask perhaps some of the questions and others, and how are you going to design that? So I always suggest themes. So you might take a different competency each. So you might ask a couple of questions on innovation, and then I swap to perhaps David, who is going to ask a couple of questions on communication, and then perhaps we go round across all the different themes. So that's acquiring information. The third area is supply. So this is the big S. This is supplying information. This is your opportunity to allow the candidate to ask questions of you about the role, about the organisation, about whatever it is that they want to ask questions about. But this is a really, really important part of the interview, because it's the opportunity for the interviewers to sell the organisation. Why should the candidate work here? Because don't forget, this candidate doesn't have to work for you. And it's just about as much the interviewers selling the organisation to the candidate as it is the candidate selling themselves to the organisation. So why should the candidate work for this organisation? What's so special about this organisation? So it's about responding effectively to the questions, and it's about making sure the whole culture, opportunities, whatever the organisation can provide in the marketplace. Why is it so good to work for this organisation? That's the supply part. The final part of the interview is the big P. It's the parting. So this is the finishing up of the interview. So this is about checking perhaps candidates' telephone numbers. It's about perhaps asking them if they're still interested in the role, having gone through this process, now that they know a little bit more about it. And then it's about letting them know when they're going to hear about whether a decision has been made, and any follow-up. Will there be a second interview? Will you make a decision? What is the next step? So I always say the questions need to be designed, firstly, against the person specification, competencies, values, whatever it is that is most meaningful to your organisation. And then thinking about the questions, allocation across the panel, and then question allocation across the different parts of the interview: the welcome, acquire information, supply information, and part.
You heard it here first. That is live, that is fresh information. Brilliant, Dr. K, love it. WASP. Fantastic, great. That's really insightful. David, your thoughts?
I love that. Yeah, as a way to structure the interview. I mean, going back to my introduction at the start, and almost being thrust into that situation where you're trying to run a recruitment process, but you've not really had any formal training on how to do that. It's and I think that's quite common for a lot of people in SMEs actually. So as a framework that you've described there, I think the structure around it is really key. And I mean, it goes for anything in terms of preparation, but yeah, fantastic in the way you can structure it there.
Okay, so David, can I just talk to you very briefly? There's obviously data protection video, a lot of information being transferred. Tell us a bit about that in terms of what you guys do from that angle, but also I just want to focus a bit more on the pre-screening and your kind of I guess introduction. So if you're representing a client, I think from what you said last week, it's kind of very personalised. It's a lot of information in the lead up to it. So give us a bit more info on that.
Yeah, so I think this is now, we're talking a little bit about how specialised recruitment tools can offer a little bit more over the generic meeting tools. And I think this is quite interesting when we start talking about the importance of employer branding, GDPR compliance, and candidate experience, which I think are really, really key things to consider. Taking the compliance issue first of all, the fact that you've got a very secure database behind the scenes, which will have been vetted and externally assessed. You've potentially got some large organizations using this who will have gone through a very strict due diligence process. But for a SaaS, software as a service platform, what that means is everybody is getting the benefit of that due diligence and that external security. So you can be assured that candidate details are very, very secure. GDPR compliance as well. So what we do is make sure we've got a data processing agreement in place with our clients. And as part of that, it's really important to, again, it comes back to communication and making sure that the candidates know how their data is collected in the first instance, how it's shared, and who's going to be looking at it. And it might just be a simple case of just the contract that you put in place with a candidate up front, and then a checkbox for them to say, yes, I've read that, I'm happy with that. And then the process around that, if they want to view that data themselves or delete it and so on. But making sure there's a full GDPR compliance and audit trail. So all of us working in this space, whether it's a technology vendor, a recruiter, or a company that's hiring, it's possible that we may need to demonstrate that compliance at some point in the future. If the worst happens and there's some sort of breach or some sort of query around it, it's really important. So that's the compliance and the security side, which I think is really important. Then we start to look at things like employer branding and how you can make your own brand stand out. And again, having a specialized tool allows you that flexibility to really bring your organization to life. So in our example, for example, it's not a case of going into a Zoom meeting. It's the end-to-end experience. So the candidate would receive a branded email with their welcome details in, for example. It would be nicely branded with your logo and your colors. And they might receive a text message just prompting them, you've got an interview at such and such a time. Again, all the different touch points, but it would look like it comes from your company. And this is all an automated process as well. When they log into the app, they won't actually be downloading the Shine app. They'll be downloading your app, and it'll be branded with your color scheme and your logo. So it's all about that experience, how it links in with if you've got a careers site or the application process, making that seem like one complete experience for the candidate. And then we move on to the content of that. And again, it's about culture and about being authentic. So whether it's a company video, whether it's a tour of the office, or whether it's a video of this is my typical day in the life. And what we always say around this is you don't have to have a slickly produced video. It doesn't need to cost an absolute fortune to do. And some of the bigger organizations, they'll have a budget where they've got fancy cameras and music in the background, and it's slickly produced. It's almost like a 2-minute movie. That's great if you're going for those, that look, and that's what you want to get across. But actually, it's at least as effective, maybe more effective, just to record something on your phone. And there's apps. The cameras are good enough that you can record in HD quality pretty easily. Upload those to the platform. There's tools available where you can put subtitles on and caption it. So again, it's all about inclusion and getting your message across. So let's say it's an advert that you want to share, say on LinkedIn or on your website. just a little thing, put the captions on, because a lot of people will scroll through and not necessarily have the sound on, but you've got the captions there so they can read it. Make it easy as possible for them to, say, apply or to understand what's going on there. And I think that's just a little thing, just removing barriers for people contacting you.
Yeah.
The videos themselves, if you're trying to get that across, and I mentioned about the captioning and recording it yourself, but there's things you can do to make that look a little bit more professional as well. So if I was holding up my phone, best will in the world, it's probably going to be a little bit shaky. But if you're trying to maybe as a hiring manager or a company do a welcome video, you could invest in a tripod from Amazon for 20 or 30 pounds, and that's a very easy way to just set it up. It could come with a Bluetooth remote control, so you just press the button and record it really easily. Maybe if you're perhaps into recording podcasts or more of a conversational piece, just a two-way microphone, which again can plug into the phone and might cost, certainly less than £50, but all of a sudden the quality then that you're getting looks just that much better. So a relatively modest investment, you can produce some really, really slick videos which look the part, but because you've done it yourself and you scripted it and you're talking to the people on the ground, as it were, then it's really bringing across that culture and what it's going to be like to work there. And that's the really important bit.
Yeah, there's some really great tips there, David. Thank you for that. I guess an interesting question that I'm thinking about is how else can video evolve? What is the future of video interviewing, and how do you see it escalating, or are we at the point where technology has reached its limits? I'm sure that's not right, David. You'll correct me on that, but where else can this go? What's the next step?
I think the interactive piece is going to become more and more important. So how we reach out perhaps to passive candidates as well. That could be a thing. So taking it from being just about selection to sourcing the right candidates. One of the things that one of the comments we've had about some of the projects we've worked in is we're conducting assessment centres, but the video interviewing piece up front, that screening piece, means that they're not wasting a slot at assessment centre. And so making sure you're getting the best possible people there, because it's expensive to put that on, the resource. You're perhaps putting people up in hotels, for example. But then the next evolution of that is actually doing that entirely online as well, and tools to facilitate that. And perhaps maybe taking it a little bit further in the life cycle as well, as to how we can help onboard them and just give them that real end-to-end from application to starting the job, and maybe not even just day one, but beyond that as well, how we can support them as much as possible. So I think it's not just about video, it's the tools, the workflow around it, and how can make people work more collaboratively with video as a centre point of that.
I certainly can't see it going anywhere, put it that way. What are your thoughts, Kay?
I think that I hope it will become more interactive. I hope that the clarity becomes a little improved. I think my aspiration for using video probably goes beyond the actual technology, and really I suppose it feeds into the candidates that we're potentially going to be recruiting. So it's the net, for example, that we're recruiting from. Instead of it being locally, where we're focusing on sourcing, perhaps we might have found some skills shortages. We can go nationally and internationally, and this is what I think is really, really exciting, is that it really extends the market and the business potentially that we can do. And of course, for no matter our geographical base, it presents such a lot of amazing opportunities, which I personally think is incredibly challenging. Whether you're working in recruitment or, you know, in any organisation, it's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to remind everybody, if you have got a question, we are drawing towards a close. I can't believe it's only been an hour, it's flown by. But if you have got a question, please don't hesitate to ask. And as we are coming to the end, as we always do, we're going to finish with our top takeaways. So from the session today, what is your big takeaway? David, if I can start with you.
WASP. I think as and I think be authentic about it, but as a framework for structuring what you do. For me, I think video, and you touched upon it there, video is a technology, but it shouldn't be the be all and end all. It's an enabler, and the very best technology is actually transparent to the process and what you're trying to achieve. It should make it easier, but not be a barrier. So it comes back to then human processes and thinking about how you're going to use that and what benefit you can get from that. So I think WASP as a way to do that is a good takeaway for me.
Hey.
Yeah, I mean, I think employer branding is such a huge topic at the moment, and if you're looking at that virtually, then it's thinking about how you as the hiring manager are presenting your organizational culture. So the way culture is defined is how we do things around here. Well, we don't know how we do things around here if each and every one of us is delivering virtually, hiring virtually. So I think for me, it's thinking about how am I presenting the organization? And it might be thinking about what are you wearing? How are you addressing candidates? The formality, the informality, all of the nuances. I think if we're going to be working virtually going forward, we're going to have a huge rethink about the way organizational culture is defined. And for me, that's the big takeaway, is how you're actually promoting your organization through your hiring process as the recruitment manager.
I think for me, it is the fact that, you know, just that basic reminder that interviews are a two-way process. So whoever you're putting in front of the camera from your company, you know, really it's their job to sell the company and sell what they can offer the candidate. And which sounds really obvious, but I think a lot of people often perceive it as the candidates are the ones that are vying for the job, where actually we're in a very rich talent pool at the moment, a lot of really good candidates available. So you have got to represent the business that you're working for in the best possible way to secure that talent.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Well, we haven't got any further questions, so I think we will leave it there. But I do really appreciate both of your time. It's been great chatting, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Hayley.
No problem. Take care.
Bye then. Bye-bye.